Hi there, I'm Danny Flexen. Welcome to the latest edition of SecondsOut ReFLEXions. Here every Monday to talk about the boxing action over the weekend. And this week I'm going to be focusing on the undercard of Anthony Joshua, Oleksandr Usyk. There'll be myriad Joshua Usyk takes, so I'm going to swerve the main event, at least for now, and talk more about the undercard and specifically the Campbell Hatton Sonny Martinez fight, which has drawn a lot of contention and controversy, not just across social media, but among the pundits and the commentators on Sky Sports on Saturday night as well. If you haven't heard, Campbell Hatton is now 4-0. Sonny Martinez has dropped to 2-5 after a 6-round decision in Hatton's favour that most people anticipated. I guess what they didn't anticipate, or rather they did, but only towards the end of the fight, was that Sonny Martinez, born in Uruguay, based in Spain, put forth a tremendous effort and looked for pretty much every neutral observer to have done enough, clearly, to win the contest, only to be denied a victory by the 58-57 1-point margin handed down by referee and scorer of the fight, Marcus McDonnell. Marcus McDonnell's a really good guy, brother, of course, of fighter trainer Jim McDonnell. Good guy, never really questioned too many of his scorecards in the past. But this one, sorry for the technical term, was an absolute stinker. Awful decision. No one even seemed to have it close by the end of the 6 rounds. A lot of unofficial scorecards, obviously, on Twitter and so on, but just seemed like as much effort and pressure as Hatton put on. Martinez always seemed to be that step ahead, quite rangy, good lateral movement, and was just picking off Hatton for the most part as he advanced. And towards the second half of the fight, really kind of stepped it up in terms of work rate as well. And although Hatton did land some good hooks and some good body shots, I felt Martinez did more than enough to come away with a well-deserved victory. And as it says on the thumbnail image for this vlog, there are no winners here, because although Campbell Hatton came out with the victory on paper, and I guess when people look back at his record in 20 years' time, if he becomes, good enough for that to be a thing, it won't matter in that sense, because people will just see the win over 6 rounds. They won't see how close it was or if it was, in effect, an injustice. However, in terms of right now for his development, putting in a performance like that, which wasn't as good as it should have been, and then still getting away with it, if you like, getting validated for that performance, is no good for him, because it can go one of two ways. Either it will knock his confidence, which isn't a good thing. It'll reassure him, if you like, that he can put in performances like that, and it doesn't matter. He can have an off night. He's allowed an off night because the judges or the referee or sole judge in this case will bail him out, which isn't a good attitude for a fighter to have. Or he might even feel like he was justified in his performance and it wasn't as bad as he thought previously, because he said after the fight he didn't think he performed particularly well. But he might feel that he then deserved the decision because, the referee's experienced, he's not in there fighting, maybe he knows a little bit better. He gave him the verdict, maybe he deserved it. I mean, he certainly didn't. But the point is, what message are we sending to the fighter? And we can talk about the other ramifications in a minute, but just for Campbell Hatton personally, who's already getting a huge amount of stick for being put there under the spotlight so early in his pro career on these big shows, and not on the early hours of these big shows when the arena's half full and maybe you'll be on Facebook Live or not even on TV. He's right there front and centre 1 or 2 before the main event. This time on Sky Sports Box Office, previously on DAZN or Sky Sports. And it's just, I've said this before, it's not a position I'd want him to be in if I was part of his team. All his flaws, all his nuances, he's still very young, he's still improving. All those things are there for people to see. And while the prominence that he endures, depending on how you look at it at the moment, will help his profile, what's the use of having a bigger and bigger and bigger profile if that just means more and more people are going to see you struggle? I think, as a lot of people have said on social media, Joe Gallagher among them, it would be good to see Hatton ply his trade, maybe go on some of the bigger shows, but earlier on, in my view, but but also go on some small hall shows to build up experience. You know, Steve Wood shows, Joe Gallagher shows up in the north, and just get his experience there. You know, people are already comparing him to his dad unfavourably, but his dad had a much longer and more celebrated amateur career. So it's kind of apples and oranges at the moment. And not only that, Hatton wasn't on massive shows every single time out, and he wasn't the main event or near the main event every single time out from early in his career. You know, Sky Sports built him up, but they built him up very, very slowly as well. You know, he had that, was it WBU belt for ages, and before he got a genuine world title shot. So it's a much different way of handling it. I think the more sensible comparison is with Conor Benn, who was placed in quite a prominent position from fairly early on in his career. And again, there were setbacks there, like when he struggled that first fight with Cedric Peno, and again, he should have lost that fight and got the benefit of the doubt. I think a lot of people then kind of turned against him a little bit, and that's changed now because he has developed and he's always in exciting fights. But I think it was a little bit later in Ben's development when he started getting that criticism. He was more able to deal with it, and he obviously came back and beat Peno more clearly, or far more clearly, in the rematch. With Hatton, this was his fourth fight, and he's already getting the benefit of a dodgy decision. He's already struggling to put on a good performance under the spotlight, and none of it's really his fault. You know, a judge giving him a decision he doesn't deserve isn't his fault. It's the judge's fault and the Board of Control for accepting judges doing things like that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But it's not his fault. You can only control what you can control, but then him and his team should be controlling the fact that he doesn't need to be on those prominent positions on these shows. So I'd like to see him, as I say, go on some smaller shows, learn his trade a bit more. But in terms of the wider ramifications, don't expect the Board of Control to do much about it. We've been in this position so many times in the last couple of years. They might call McDonnell in to explain his scorecard, but as long as they're satisfied that there's no kind of corruption or influence involved, that he was giving his honest appraisal of the fight, then I doubt any action will be taken, because that's what precedent has shown us. But just because they believe it's an honest appraisal, and I've got no reason to doubt McDonnell's honesty, it's still an incorrect and misleading reading of the fight. So, you know, does he know the criteria well enough? Was his angles good at all times? Was his positioning good? Because being a referee and the judge at the same time is a very difficult job. They don't do that in every country. We do it here, but not everyone does. There's clearly a problem with officiating and judging specifically in the UK. Most evidenced by the fact that with a round to go, or even at the final bell, pretty much everyone on social media was saying, yeah, Martinez has done enough, he should get the decision, but watch Hatton get it. Hatton will get this. So it's the inevitability of all of the verdict that's the saddest part of all. We kind of knew it was coming, and it's happening more and more. So yeah, I think the Board of Control need to do more about this, make sure all the judges are singing from the same hymn sheet, they've all got the same criteria, and maybe even consider, and I know it's expensive and you have to work out who's going to pay for it, it's not easy, but maybe work out a way to have 3 judges for all fights, even for the prelim fights of 4 and 6 rounders as they do in the US. I'm not saying there's no bad decisions in the US, there are, but having 3 judges instead of 1 makes it less of a chance that the overall verdict will be wrong. So, yeah, I mean, I'd say that. Sonny Martinez, obviously the biggest loser of all, because he's put in a huge effort in the biggest stage of his career. He's coming off a win, but overall he only got 2 wins in his career, and it should have been 3. He must be devastated. Obviously, he's got a big purse to partially mitigate that despair, but it's still not right. When you're a fighter and you fought your heart out, he can take pride in his performance, but he hasn't been given his just rewards, and I feel for him for that. So he doesn't really benefit from it. Campbell Hatton doesn't benefit from it. Matchroom and Sky Sports don't benefit from it because they're party to what happened, you know, even if it's just by association. The Board of Control doesn't benefit from it, and the sport as a whole in the UK doesn't benefit because it's yet another questionable decision, and I say that politely, it's a lot more than questionable. And it's going to start to dissuade foreign managers from sending their fighters over, foreign fighters from wanting to fight here, and so on and so forth. And people will switch off from boxing to an extent as well. I know the vast majority of casual fans probably don't care, but a hardcore fan base won't want to keep watching dodgy decisions if they feel, and when I say dodgy, I'm not alleging corruption, I mean unjust decisions. And they're not going to want that. So losers in every aspect of this does not benefit anyone. And if the next massive Sky event comes out and Campbell Hatton's the second or third fight from the end, I'm going to be very disappointed. But moving on from that, and as again, not his fault at all, but what he does next could be something he can control. So let's wait and see. We also saw Lawrence Okolie get a facile, what was it, 3-round victory in his mandatory defence of the WBO cruiserweight title against Dylan Prasovic. I predicted it would be done in 4, so it was, and that's not bigging me up. I think anyone could have predicted that. To be fair, mismatch from the start. We now want to see Okolie in unifications, if not just accelerate the move up to heavyweight, because he's not learning anything against this level of opposition. He'll learn more in the gym with Shane McGuigan and in sparring than he'll learn against the likes of Prasovic. Florian Marku wasn't quite the fireworks we expected against Maxim Prodan, but he well won it. So fair play to him. Hopefully we get to see a bit more excitement. Next time out, Campbell Hatton, we've already covered. It wasn't the most exciting undercard in the world. Callum Smith obviously delivered a bit of a scary finish against Lenin Castillo, landing a huge right hand that had Castillo involuntarily shaking on the canvas. No one really wanted to see that, and he was taken to hospital. And thankfully, he's made a full recovery, as far as we're aware. But yeah, scary knockout aside, in the brief time the fight lasted, Smith looked impressive in his debut at 175 pounds. But similar to Okolie, we want to see him with some genuine competition next time out. And there's no disrespect to Castillo, but he was seen by most as a gatekeeper at this weight. Callum Smith proved that he can perform well against that level of opposition at his new division. So now we want to see him in a real test. So hopefully that comes against the likes of Joshua Buatsi or someone of a similar level next time out. Not the best undercard, but the main event, as everyone else will tell you, I'm sure, really delivered. And as I've always said, pay-per-views are predominantly sold on the main event. So no one's going to be complaining too much, I don't think. That's my take anyway. I'd like to hear yours. Let me know what you think about the Hatton decision. Not whether you agreed with it or not, because I think nearly unanimously it's going to be no, Sonny Martinez should have got the decision. But more the ramifications it has on the sport and what steps should be taken to avoid things like this going forward. And also just who you liked on the undercard, what performances, Okolie, Callum Smith, Marku. If you saw the Facebook Live fight, which I missed, I must say, which I haven't talked about it too much, Usyk against Baysan Gurov. Let me know what you thought of that as well. I'll be back on Thursday with FLEXpectations, looking ahead to the first show in the new Sky Sports era, featuring Chris Eubank Jr., among others. And Monday, 4:30 PM as well, for the next ReFLEXions. Thanks very much for your time, and I'll see you all soon.